So, Coté, you've been in tech a long time, yeah?
Yes.
And you've used to live in Austin, so you got your start in tech in Austin.
Yes.
Do you think the part about being in Austin matters? That's one question. And in general, do you think it's important to be like in a tech city to be able to be influential in tech?
Well, I think the answer to both of those is yes. And I think the reason, and I'll try not to be, I like to use words like this, loquacious. Loquacious, is that how you say it? Long-winded. I actually got into tech, one, because my dad worked at IBM in Austin, right?
Okay.
They manufactured stuff. And so we always had computers around. And he would spend the like $1984 of $3,000 to get an IBM machine because he worked at IBM. He was always like, what if my boss comes over? I'm going to need to have an IBM computer. Good old.
How many times did that come in handy? Yeah.
I don't think his boss ever came over. But so, I was always surrounded by computers because of that. They would I would read PC Magazine when I slept in his office. On the weekends I would go there. Anyways, but then in high school, we got donated. I think it was an AS400 and we had a T1 connection that had also been donated. And my science teacher was asked, like, who are some people who know computers? And I was this group of people who did that. And so what I did was I was in charge of writing the HTML pages that was kind of documenting the whole process. And then in like 95, this guy who was the dad of a student was doing an internet startup, because of course you were at that time. And he went to that science teacher and said, do you know anyone who knows computers? And me and like 4 other people were sent off to go do that because we would work, I think it's been long enough, basically under the table for like $7 an hour. Right? Like this is and this, to your point of Austin, I'm sure there's people like this in Silicon Valley. But I think that is the perfect mixture of like a Texas CEO who's like, hey, I need some of those kids over there. I'm going to be real cheap who can do the programming. I'm going to give them about $7 an hour. And they went to school with my son. And like, it was great. We did a VRML, virtual reality mall for Earful of Books, Allen's Boots. And and then City National Bank of Taylor. And then I'm being long-winded here. I'll wrap it up. But then what the CEO found is the only people who paid their bills were the banks that we had. And then so we went and we did online banking software called Funds Express. So I think that
all this is like a high school job.
Yeah. And then that was from like 94 to 2000. And I think that whole chain of events happened because I was in Austin and because it was a tech city, right? Whereas I feel like now, great industry analyst Ben Thompson is from Madison, Wisconsin, I think. But I don't think he would have had an experience like that. He had to leave Madison to do anything.
I think of Austin as like being a tech city now, but I don't think of it as being a tech city back then as much.
Yeah. Well, in the early, I forget, I think IBM moved there in the late 70s or early 80s, and it was a hardware city back then, and there was a lot of what do you call it, local development and stuff. You have the university there, and there was this joint venture. It might still be there. Our guests might know, called MCC, and it was basically like an academic VC sort of thing, and so that kind of evolved, and then you had Tivoli as a company and Trilogy as a company, and then eventually it went software and all the hardware. There's probably some hardware, but it's basically gone.
I'm going to ask you one more question, and then we'll bring the guest on. But that is, now that like since the pandemic, so many places are work remote only. Do you think it's still important to be in a tech city like it used to be when you were young?
I'm going to give the answer that I believe.
I should hope you always do that. Is that an exception now?
I wouldn't be able to talk so much if I only gave answers I believe. But I think the notion around work from home, that if you're an established person, it's irrelevant where you work, more or less. But if you're just starting off, unless you've got to, let me put it this way. You have to somehow just like be around people. And you could just be around people online. That's totally feasible to do that. I think that's something these old executives who want everyone to go back to the office don't realize is
everyone could just play Minecraft
online
instead.
Yeah. You can hang out with people, sometimes even better if you're not in the same location of them. So you somehow need that effect of hanging out with people in order to kind of like pinball around, like move around and find things accidentally. And then once you stop doing things accidentally, then you can be more deliberate and it doesn't really matter. But I think it's good to have
getting started is
whatever that
thing.
Cluster is, whether it's virtual or physical.
So let's get our guest's opinion. Our guest is Robert Reeves, who also lives in Austin, Texas. Will you tell us a little about yourself? And also, I want to know, does it matter that you are in Austin? Is Austin the reason you're in tech right now?
Well, thank you for having me. So yeah, I was smiling when Coté was going through his history because it lines up with mine as well. Yeah. So, and funny thing mentioning MCC, I know the Inmans because I'm in Austin. It's Admiral Bobby Inman was the one who started that back in the day. And they chose Austin to build this, consortium to compete against other countries that were kind of whipping our butt at the time with computers. And they put it in Austin because of the proximity to IBM, Texas Instruments, and University of Texas. It was about getting talent out of the university. That's why they made it work. And I think MCC is probably one of the three pillars of Austin Tech, the other two being Austin Ventures, because you need two inputs for a company. You need capital and people, but also Dell.
Yeah,
having
them out.
Funding.
Yeah, yes,
and so which they all supported each other, and it's just great. Look, I actually got into tech because I stumbled upon Unix and Perl during my undergrad. I was hanging out at the Econ building. We had this wonderful lab on the top floor with a bunch of old Spark Station pizza boxes. 21-inch CRT, amazing. The button had 3 mouses, crazy. And I loved it. And grad student came up to me and said, "Why are you here?" And I was taking an econometrics class doing linear regression. And it's like, I'm waiting for my job to get done. And he said, you can have it email you when it's done. And I said, "Show me this black magic. Show it to me." Year later, a buddy of mine who was in the Valley, he said, "Hey, you know Unix, you know Perl. Do you know how much they're paying people out here?" And I said, we talked about it. I was like, there's no way I'm moving. I was very much enjoying the Austin 90s lifestyle and decided to stay. And I was just very fortunate because I caught it when the tide was rising. It worked out. Does it matter where you are? I think, prior to COVID, absolutely. But now, if you are starting out, it is very helpful to be physically located because you get to build those relationships. And it's really about going and having interactions with people outside of your job. Going to a local meetup, those sorts of things that are super valuable. But you can do that elsewhere. And so if you're bouncing around, you're a digital nomad, well, you can go to a lot of different places. And I would argue that you probably have an advantage over me who's just been in Austin.
That's true. So once you got started in tech, how long was it before you're like, hey, you know what I want to do is found a startup?
Well, it's so I was at Trilogy, one of the companies that Coté mentioned. I was one of the industry hires.
Oh, so, did you get a BMW?
No, actually, I think I was driving an old beat up Land Cruiser.
Well, there was I think it was Trilogy. There was lore that they were hiring people and had so much money that they would give people BMWs to hire on as like a signing bonus.
Yes, that is all true. It was a wild and wacky time. They would go and recruit the best and brightest out of Stanford, MIT, Carnegie Mellon, Waterloo in Canada, and just throw money at them. They would move to Austin, go through what they called Trilogy University, TU, and learn the ways of Trilogy. They would learn how, internal processes and how to write. Some of them didn't know Java at the time. Okay, great. You'll learn that. But they had legendary Friday afternoon parties, party on the patio, pop, they called it, over on 360 and, by the Pennybacker Bridge, bucolic, it was wonderful. Vegas trips, all that stuff. But I was one of the industry hires. I was one that was brought in and said, like, okay, let's make sure we get the software out correctly and help the TU members.
You were like the mid-range adult.
Right.
Making things happen. That's
and what had happened was I wound up getting laid off a month after 9/11. So nobody's buying software. And .com was kind of trending down. And so I decided that I was going to join the circus. And so I went, and then I had a lot of friends that were.
Is this the literal circus, or is this slang for something in tech that I don't know about?
No, it was the Warped Tour. So
okay, yeah.
I joined the Warped Tour, and I was a production assistant for catering. So traveled all over because, that was a rough road. I'd gone through an IPO in .com, moving over to Trilogy. It was a grind. And so needed a little take a step back because I was kind of over software. It was not as great. Once the things start getting a little rougher, it was challenging. And so with, no more parties on the patio and stuff like that. But through that experience, it was great. I actually wrote some software for them. Barcode scanner to help with people coming through the catering line. That was a lot of fun. But then wound up being a tour manager for Flogging Molly, and even more fun. Traveled the world. But I realized at that point that I wasn't disappointed in software. I wasn't running away from it. I was actually trying to figure out how can I stay in software but do it my way. And that's what led me to starting my first company, Furnace, which was an early DevOps tool, installer for WebSphere, WebLogic, JBoss. Write once, run anywhere with Java Enterprise, sure, but getting it installed in the app servers. We sold that company to BMC, thank God, before containers, because that destroyed that market. But I did it because I had to. I was emotionally compelled to do it. It wasn't about making money, but it was really about I don't want to regret not doing it. And so I didn't know how to do it. I didn't know how to start a company. But luckily, there's lots of venture capitalists that'll help you.
Well, I don't think we discussed this at the time. But how did you decide on the product that you had at Furnace? Because I was excited about it, but it's a pretty boring category. But
oh, yeah.
What were you going to say, Whitney?
Oh, it's a similar question, but it's slightly different, which is, do you decide the product first or just that you're going to have a startup first and then find the product?
Well, the first was I was going to start a company. I don't know what it is. And you don't quit your job and start working on it. You've got to figure out what is the problem that you're going to solve. And my recommendation for anybody trying to start a company is find the pain. Don't get enamored with, the science experiment and the tech. Really focus on what is the pain that you're trying to address, or find the pain.
Can connect for me because I'm imagining you doing catering at Floggy Molly concerts, which are already is convoluted what you said. But so how are you finding anybody's tech pain when you're touring in a band and doing catering things?
Well, I went back. So after a year, it was a wonderful year. And I said, okay, it's time. It's the market is coming back. I'm going to go and do this. And so went back to early DevOps, software configuration management. That's what we called it back then. And started working with a lot of companies that were adopting Java app servers, whether they were ISVs or large companies. And I started seeing this pain that it was really easy to release the application. We finally kind of cracked the code on CI and CD, CI at least. And moving towards, getting that application on the app server was such a nightmare. I was working for an ISV that had a transportation app, and it was Java Enterprise. And we allowed our customers to run on WebSphere and WebLogic. And I had to maintain a separate set of scripts for each platform. And I was like, dude, this sucks. And working with, my colleagues and other people in the industry, I realized that I'm not the only person struggling with this. And in my interactions with customers of that company, I would ask them, are you struggling with this with your other applications, internal apps, ones that are provided for you? And that's where I found the pain. It certainly wasn't hanging out at a venue in Kansas City, Missouri.
Just like talking about app servers at 2 a.m. in the morning.
Yeah, just hanging out. What you do normally on the tour bus. No big deal.
Lots of XML. People are doing XML straight to the head there.
Yeah, it's just a nightmare. But it's really, if you can find a big enough market pain and you throw smart people at it, and you get a really good team, you're going to solve that. And all you've got to do is once you find that market pain, you have to make yourself a little bit better than that. So a little bit less pain. You don't have to totally eliminate it. One of my favorite jokes is about two hunters coming across a bear in the woods. And one of the hunters just stops, sits down, recognizes that, just gives up. I'm going to die. And the other, while the bear is charging, and the other hunter sits down and starts putting on running shoes. The other hunter's like, what are you doing? You're not going to outrun the bear. And said, I don't have to. I just have to outrun you. When we're talking about market pain and addressing that when starting a company, you don't have to solve it 100%. You just have to be slightly better alternative.
I'm not sure I agree.
Oh, sure.
Because of, and I'm happy to be wrong because you're talking from experience and I'm talking purely theoretically. But what I see is like a huge amount of tool fatigue. And so if you're asking me to get another product and another tool to make something slightly less uncomfortable, I think I might prefer something to be a little harder but more simple.
Yeah.
Than adding yet another piece of complexity.
Yeah, I agree with that. From an engineering perspective, and certainly from procurement, do we want to add another vendor? Is this really? And so that's why you have to find a very intense pain to get past those initial sales objections of is this another tool? Is this a one-off? Alton Brown, big fan of his shows. He does no single purpose tools in his kitchen.
Yes, exactly.
And so I'm the same way with software. It's why do we have to have it? So it's got to be very specific. In the second company, Liquibase, I questioned this as well, where you're like, are we going to have another tool here?
Yeah.
And the reason why we did Liquibase was because that Liquibase open source already existed. It already had people that were solving this problem with Liquibase, DevOps for the database. The only problem was it only supported 8 databases. And there was a coming explosion of more. So our logic was, okay, we don't have to worry about bringing Liquibase in because it's already there. What we're doing is showing them a paid version that provides more value. They're already sold on it.
Yeah.
So
That makes more sense to me. Yeah.
Yes. And I certainly learned that from the first company, Furnace. And every single startup you have, you learn, you get better. And for the pivot on, well, not pivot, but personal pivot, I should say, for Liquibase was really leaning in on open source and taking advantage of an existing community, not taking advantage, leveraging, I should say. It sounded bad, but really saying, okay, these folks are committed. They're providing commits. They're sharing issues on GitHub. What can we offer them? What are the problems here that are preventing a large enterprise rolling this out as a standard?
So what did you get, more explicitly, what did you get wrong the first time that you improved for Liquibase?
Well, I don't think, the reason why Furnace was acquired was not because of the technology or anything special that we were doing. We just kept beating a lot of large software companies at sales.
Okay.
We were just kicking their butt because we were highly targeted, good product market fit. And so for the next company, I really wanted something that was not going to be starting from zero. And that's why using an existing open source project and inviting that founder of that project to be a founder of the company and say, hey, let's, we're bringing expertise, we're bringing capital, you're bringing intellectual property, let's do this. And so for us, it was really about trying to get, we didn't have to build up and explain this problem to the market. It was already being solved, just not well enough for large enterprises to adopt.
While you were selling your DevOps configuration management, write once, run anywhere tool, how were you able to also identify a problem with databases for your second company?
You listen to your customer, because they said, hey, thanks for solving this part of the problem. What are you doing about databases? I'm not a genius. I'm far from it.
I know. No. It's evident, Robert. Thank you. I'm kidding.
No, you're absolutely right. But what I am good at is understanding that process that the customer goes through, that prospect, and seeking input from them. Like every time I've done go-to-market on a product, it is all about asking the customers first, the ones that are hanging around. Why do you use this? Why don't you just throw this out? What value are you getting out of this? And then taking that and repeating it back to the market. And so if you listen to your customers, you listen to your prospects, and you have to certainly be careful of this in the sense that you don't want to listen just to the loudest voices. And it always seems to be on the far extremes of the normal distribution curve. So you got to work hard to get to that, where that mean is, and listen to them. But if you listen to your customers and you focus on their pain, not what they think will solve it, but the pain, and you're able to address that, you will have a successful company.
I hear you and I agree, but I still can't wrap my head around like how you're in there doing sales for something related to CI and you're having a conversation about databases. It just feels so far away.
Oh, it is. And you have to find the pain inside the company. So one of the things that we focus on at Liquibase is really identifying who's experiencing the slowdown when we've got a disconnect between how quickly it takes to roll out an app on Kubernetes, but we can't because we have to wait till somebody updates the database. We're still doing it the old way. So who cares about that? Is it development? Because probably not, because they're able to update their databases in dev and test, no problem. Is it testing? No, because I think our folks over there are quite good with automation. It is the product owners. it is the person that sees value when the application is in production, as we all do, as Dr. Forsgren tells us, right? But it is also the DBA team. Are you getting crushed? And in the early days of Liquibase, I was sitting down with a senior DBA at a very large bank. And I asked him, I said, why did you become a DBA? Why? What was your career path here? And it turns out he was a car person. He was a tuner. He really liked figuring out, okay, can I get a few more horsepower out of this engine? And he likes doing that, with databases. One of his big, he got so much self-actualization out of saying, I don't think we need any more of these database licenses. I think I can eke out some more performance out of this. And it made him feel really good. And I asked him, I said, well, aren't these application updates or updates to database schema causing problems for you, stopping you from doing the stuff that you want to do? And he said, absolutely. And so for them, this person wanted to get out of the business of, handling tickets and really work on the stuff that gave them that good feeling.
Fulfillment. Yeah.
Yeah. And so when we're talking about like, how do we connect those different types of the organization, you got to build a coalition of the willing and align around something that you can all agree on. And everybody wants to do the stuff they want to do. And that's an easy alignment point.
So Liquibase is still independent? They weren't acquired by anyone?
That is correct. They're doing very well.
So I'm curious to hear you talk about. I don't think I can make a question out of it. So what you think of this is, it seems like there is a type of startup, a tech startup that's basically like a single product kind of startup, and I wonder if when you're on like the executive team of that, what you're thinking about the future of that company is. Like, are you always looking for an acquisition? Are you thinking like we need to add 5 more products so we can, I guess, I don't know what the rate is nowadays. You have to have like 500 million or $1 billion to IPO, but like we've got to have the amount of money so we can IPO, or, or we're going to always be happy being a $30 million company in perpetuity. Like what, I don't know, like what's that long-term planning that the executive team and the board does to think through that stuff?
Well, the strategy with Liquibase has always been acquisition. You have to go in when you get that first dollar in whether it's angel round, seed round, Series A. You have a thesis that these investors come in and they agree to. And early on, we realized at Liquibase that this was not a platform company. It was a technology that is crucial, absolutely necessary, and fits in well with whatever previous, whatever wave of technology comes. So certainly early CI/CD, certainly cloud and containers. Yeah, no brainer. Certainly applications with AI and making certain that the data that's being fed in is properly structured. Okay, these are all good things. So one, if you're playing for an acquisition, you have to make certain that you are not kind of cut out from that next wave of technology.
Yeah. You have to be current. Like you don't really want to acquire a company that's old technology stack wise, with some exceptions here and there, but you want to be acquiring something new technology. Otherwise you would have just done it on your own.
Well, exactly. It's got to be forward thinking or forward looking, I should say. And so for our calculus, it was very much focused on acquisition. And so we raised money accordingly. If you're building a platform, you're going to raise a lot more money.
Yeah.
But the expectations are a lot higher for growth and those sorts of things. And that is like cliff diving. You're either world champion or you're stuck on a rock. For us, We wanted to focus on a very specific problem that was encountered across a lot of different verticals and a lot of different tech stacks. So that's what we wanted to focus on.
And do you think as an outsider, let's say you've got your, I'm going to call it the acquisition strategy versus the whatever IPO strategy. And can you, as an outsider, are there signals that get thrown off when you can see a company is moving to another way of doing something? Like, for example, I would think if you have a small company and they keep buying these other little small companies, that might be indicative of them, like they're going to go the IPO route, right? Like, because they're trying to build out and build their portfolio out. Like I was thinking, well, I guess they did, but it's interesting to think of like the monitoring companies, like, I think was AppDynamics public when Cisco acquired them, but then Datadog is independent now and PagerDuty. So like these monitoring companies, at some point, like they just like paged you. Right. But then their portfolio grew and grew and grew. And like Puppet and Chef went through the same stuff. Maybe not Chef, but like Puppet bought a bunch of little companies. So I don't know. Like, I wonder if there's some strategic moves you can see as an outsider where you're like, now they want to be acquired, or now they want to go public.
Well, I will tell you this. On the inside, it is not really IPO or acquisition that is discussed regularly. What is discussed is revenue. Right. How are we getting to that next inflection? Are we hitting the quarter? How are things looking? Now, there's certainly strategy where you think about, okay, we could purchase revenue by acquiring a company. We could acqui-hire, perhaps, fill a gap. And, small startups do that all the time. But I don't think there's any real indication. If a company is attempting to build themselves up to get to an IPO, their CEO is going to be talking about it. Yeah.
Right. And so they'll have like public company language where there's like a huge total addressable market, a TAM. But like the way that on the other podcast, we like to make fun of the public cloud companies where they're like, whoa, we're just in the first inning of a 5 million mile marathon, right? Like you want to portray yourself as just infinite growth that you have ahead of you. And so maybe that's the kind of language you can pick up on. If they're talking about market sizes, then obviously they're angling for that.
Well, sure. But there is, there are two, if you're looking at acquisitions by revenue, you're going to see a little, if we had a chart with number of acquisitions on the y-axis and X is just revenue, you would see a significant bump on the left side of where people are doing the tech tuck thing. A lot of acquisitions, crazy multiples because the revenue is so low. Then it's bimodal. Then you'll see another bump further down where people are purchasing revenue.
Yeah.
And that's where you start seeing companies like, large acquisitions where a company is throwing off, 25 mil, they got a 10x multiple. Okay. So it's going to be 250. That's great. Or you'll see even more than that, where it's 100 million and it'll be $1 billion acquisition. But at that point, the company is deciding, well, what is the time value of money to get from that 100 million to whatever threshold of revenue we got to get to go IPO? There's so much risk there. Market could turn. You might not get there. And also at that point, investors, venture capitalists have been in there a while. They have got to return money to their limited partners, their investors, the ones that gave them money. So there's a lot of moving parts. Acquisition is just a lot easier. Really is. Would love to be in a position where you can actually discuss that. But frankly, I've never been. It's high speed, low drag, small companies.
Can I ask you something I've always wondered about startups? I see all the startups around at KubeCon or whatever. And I wonder, how does that startup get their first customer? Like you have 0 customers. Who's going to trust you? To do stuff in their operations.
That's right. I love this question because if simple answer is if you have a difficult or intense enough pain, finding a customer who wants to alleviate that customer or alleviate that pain is going to be easier. It's not easy.
Sense.
It's hard.
Yeah.
And also there is an appetite from companies, larger companies, to take risks on these smaller companies because they want to be able to be exposed to that positive black swan. They might get something early. So our first customer at Furnace was IBM.
That's a big fish.
I know.
Yeah.
It was a small deal. It was $500.
There you go. Okay.
So, and this is part of being in, locally being able to have meetings. And so went over to the offices off of Burnett Road. And
I worked there.
Yeah, it's a great campus, but this was a division of IBM that was building a telco app that ran on WebSphere. And they were having a tough time updating the application for their customers on WebSphere. And you could wrap Furnace in Install Anywhere, Install Shield, whatever, and click, great, installs. It's awesome. And so we had the technical leader of that division, of that group that had this product. We put together a proposal for $5,000. That was going to be our first deal. And this manager, she said, "Oh, this is great. This is a wonderful deal. I'll let you know when I get approval for it." Immediately flashing red lights, sirens, warning, deal, time kills deals. So I said, "Well, what do you mean approval? I thought you could, what's your approval level?" He said, "Oh, I can only approve for $500. And I said, "Well, congratulations. Today is your lucky day." Now, the reason why, and she did it, and it was great. She was like, "Oh, awesome. Great." Now, the reason why I didn't care, left $4,500 on the table, is because I wanted to be able to say, "Oh, the people that made WebSphere, yeah, they use our stuff."
Yeah.
And so that's how we got second, third, fourth, fifth, all the way up to 10. Every single sales call, we targeted WebSphere at that point, and we told them, didn't put it on the website or anything, but we shared that information and to earn that trust. But to get that first deal, you just got to get the deal. It is hard. You will spend more time on that deal than anything else. But the next one will be easier and then easier. But it requires just a lot of intestinal fortitude.
At what point does the strategy start to change?
Well, when you start looking at scaling, you can't scale that. And so around customer 3, and when we got our first large enterprise 6-figure deal at Liquibase, I contacted that team and said, "Why are you using this product? Why are you using Liquibase?" And they gave us the usual answers, just being able to get updates out quickly. There was also a couple of things that they mentioned that we had no idea about the number of people that had permission to a database. But basically parroting back what we thought was there. But they did it in a way that was unique. And what we did was we took those answers, obviously anonymized, and we're not going to say they said this. But if this customer is betting on us, a large bank, 6-figure deal, is purchasing this, well, then why don't we tell the world these are our value props? Again, not a smart person, but listen to the customer and we'll say, okay, let's repeat this back to the market and see if we get a response. And that's how we started when we shifted from kind of man-to-man defense to zone coverage. And that's where you start getting the scale. Then, of course, you have different messaging for each vertical. perhaps each database, tech stack. But it's all around the same stuff, that if you can listen to the customer and you start pivoting to blasting out that message in a way that they're going to receive it well, that is when you know you're onto something.
You added marketing.
There it is. It's really about, but it has to start from listening to the customer. Too often startup founders will say, well, they will project onto the customer their thoughts and beliefs, and that's not a good way of doing it.
Now that we're back around to Liquibase, I want to ask about something that you kind of brought up before, which is with Liquibase, you were starting to leverage open source. Mm-hmm. What did that mean at the start of Liquibase, and what does that mean to you now?
Well, open source is a force multiplier. I will say this, that this is my thesis, that open source is best used, and I'm talking about companies here. I'm not talking about individuals and those sorts of things. I'm talking companies, whether it is people creating solutions and selling them or building solutions in-house for their customers. All right. So think end user versus software vendor. You want to use open source for non-differentiated technology. You want to use open source for things that don't make you money. Mm-hmm. These are things like underlying infrastructure. Because if you are able to standardize on that and you're able to share the burden, you're going to have a far better outcome. So that's exactly what happened with Borg and Kubernetes. Why Google? Oh, go ahead.
Oh, how do you know when it's worth the effort to like train and pay engineers to like implement and maintain open source at your business versus when you want to get a managed solution for open source, maybe, or not?
Well, so let me repeat the question, make sure I've got this right. So you're a large enterprise and you're debating.
I didn't say you're a large enterprise.
Okay. You're a company. Yes. Okay. Uh-huh. So you're a company and you're saying, all right, are we going to use a managed, and let's just pick Kubernetes, make life easier. All right.
Sure. Okay.
So you could run Kubernetes in your data center, or you can run it as a managed solution. And what is the kind of tipping point where you make the decision between them?
Right. Because what you just said is kind of like you want to run open source for non-differentiating things. Mm-hmm. And I think maybe as like open source does have it can have a high overhead for training and running it.
Yeah, absolutely. It does. So you have to have a pretty high bar to bring that in-house and to run it. Exactly. And so the good news is, and we're still talking about Kubernetes, but thing really fits in here. Okay.
Yes.
And so the good news is you're picking an open source solution, a tech stack that you've got a large number of people that are experts on it. You got a lot of companies that are supporting it. You from the biggest of the big SIs to local, small, regional SIs or consultancies. So there's a lot of surface area there, and that's really good. And now you're deciding, okay, am I going to self-host this or am I going to use hyperscaler? Okay, great. Mm-hmm. So the good news is you're making that decision because you've already picked the tech stack, and that's positive. But how you make the decision is based on really what is, are you concerned about noisy neighbor? Are you concerned about data provenance? Are you concerned about, is there really a cultural blocker? Do you have cloud antibodies inside your company that are going to prevent this kind of move? The other question is, do we really need to use Kubernetes for everything? Can we use some cloud providers' container service that might be able to solve the problem? And I would argue that you could, but you certainly need to make the decision on when are we going to switch to a non-proprietary solution or away from the proprietary to something open standard. So there's a lot of moving parts here, and there's no just, okay, well, here it is. Here's an integer that I can give you for the answer, but I will say this, that not a lot of people are asking this question. Not a lot of people are saying, well, wait a minute, what is the thing that's going to make us move from one place to the next? They're not asking questions about how big does this bill have to get before we move this open standard to another provider. People aren't asking that.
And when they're not asking those questions, they're likely to be using a managed solution beyond when it makes sense to.
Right.
Okay.
And so sometimes you are going to get to the point of scale. I think that if you're running maybe $1 trillion in transactions through your application a day, you might want to self-host because that's worth building up that expertise. You do not want any barrier between you and the platform if you've got that kind of scale.
And then once you do decide, okay, maybe I should self-host, I should at least look into it. What's your first step into that world? It's an overwhelming place.
Oh, it is. And the key is you have got to bring in experts. Kelsey Hightower always says, if you want to do open source right, hire a maintainer. Do not put them in they're not doing daily stand-ups. You're not going to assign Jira tickets to them. They are going to serve as, look, if you're betting your business on this technology stack, you better have somebody with a seat at the table. 2, you need to also position them to win and be successful so that they are evangelizing internally. And 3, they are your last stop on support. They also keep your vendor honest. So if you're doing this and the vendor's saying, oh, we're going to have this out in second quarter of next year and blah, blah, blah. And the maintainer's like, that's news to me. So that's very valuable. I think the first step with that is to bring in a maintainer, somebody who has that expertise. And you can also trade with your friends. If you have you can work and build kind of an ad hoc consortium where maybe your company has hired a maintainer for one project, and another company has a maintainer for another project, and you're working together and you both care about that project. Maybe you're in different industries. That's ideal. You can just share that burden, that load.
So you recently worked at Linux Foundation. Is this relevant to your job there? Were you helping people utilize open source?
Well, absolutely. So, I led strategic partnerships and business development over at CNCF. And so it was really helping people understand, and I really focused on end users. These are banks, insurance companies, manufacturers that are taking advantage of cloud native tech and helping them understand that they can be truly the masters of their own destiny. They don't have to rely on a vendor to take them down the path, that they can figure this out themselves. There is things, structures in place in this community, and not just through CNCF, not just through LF. There's ways of engaging with this community where you can accelerate your adoption of this stuff. And when you do, you save money. Like that, for me, the biggest thing about open source is that it's open standards and it's really about vendor management at that large company scale. If we're able to use, we have all of our apps using OTel, Open Telemetry. We're able to pick the best deal for an observability platform. It really helps us out instead of using something proprietary, a custom agent. We're able to go. That's the power of Kubernetes as well. We can move this.
And if some vendor rate jacks their prices, you're like, that's cool. I'll just switch. Yeah, no biggie.
I don't think
that's the dream.
I know.
Especially if you had some sort of software that could extract the configuration from one system and then convert it and put it in another system.
Well, if we're using GitOps, then it's super easy, right? No problem.
Right. You just change a YAML file somewhere.
We're done.
Now,
sometimes the threat and a credible threat of being able to change is good enough to get a 20% haircut. and that's always a good thing.
Yeah, but I like that. This is some good advice for negotiating a price. You might be able to get it to $500 if you're the first customer.
Absolutely.
I like this. Now, you mentioned earlier doing catering management, right?
Yeah.
And like, I think it should be obvious to anyone listening that you probably have analyzed something like the following is like, so how do you like optimize the catering so that like, you're not just serving like soft, gross lasagna every night, but that you're like making money, but that it's like food that you would want to eat, that like you're not ashamed of serving, right? Because catering can go like terribly, right?
Yes,
but it could be cheap.
We've all had bad catering.
Yeah. So how do you balance that out? Like, how do you run that kind of business?
Well, one thing that I noticed, and this is the company that was the catering company, is Tada Catering out of LA.
Great name.
Nice. And Shelly Lynn Brandler, she is amazing. So she now does the artist catering for Coachella, LA Forum, Hollywood Bowl, all that stuff. And so what I noticed that her and her team, and Mike Wardell is her chef. What I noticed is that the stuff that can stick around, they get done. Like for example, the salad bar. You can prep all the salad bar stuff. But the thing about the food,
and so by stick around, you mean you can like make it 10 hours ahead of time and it's fine.
Right. Keep it in the fridge. And then if we need to replenish the salad bar, we take it from the refrigerator over there. So those are the prep things. But lasagna, grilled chicken breast, those sorts of things, you actually want to start grilling those. You don't make all the grilled chicken breasts 2 hours before lunch.
Yeah. You
set up your grill station. And when chicken breasts are starting to get down, we're like, okay, last, hotel pan goes out. Great. Now we're going to grill this up. 6-8 minutes, because those commercial stuff is really hot. And then you take out a fresh batch and you've got somebody slicing chicken breasts as they come off the grill. And so you're making the mains and those sorts of things while service is going on.
And have you done like some, I don't know, is there like gold rat theory of constraints that gets applied to catering where you're figuring out the throughput and identifying the bottlenecks, and like, how do you know how much chicken breast to make based on like the number of people, and do you build that up intuitively, or is there an Excel sheet? Like what goes on with all that?
Chefs know this. They know exactly how many ounces, and there's always a push-pull between, the kitchen and front of house on portion control. That's always a challenge, because if you're, said, okay, everybody's getting 6 ounces of chicken breast, and then everybody starts getting 8, well, guess what? You're gonna, a third of your people aren't going to eat. It's going to eat it up.
How did you bring these lessons into your startups?
Well, it was really about finding pain. So when I joined Warped Tour, they had a process for seeing who could come through the catering line. And it was a laminate that had all the tour dates on it, and you would punch it out with a little, one of those hole punchers.
All right.
But people had a tendency to lose these things. I'm like, I lost my food laminate, and they'd get fined, $50. Okay, great. Here's $50. Well, guess what? Somebody's, boyfriend would find the laminate that's traveling along with them, and they'd start eating. So they were supposed to only feed 350 people a meal. It was ballooning up to like 700 plus.
Whoa.
People are getting like 2 ounces of chicken breast at the tail end of the tour. And so what I did was I built a barcode scanner app. It was in Access because I needed something that could move from a laptop without internet. And this was also, early 2000s. Okay, we're just going to knock it out. And put a unique barcode sticker on every single person's laminate. And we would scan them. Beep. And what that wound up doing was turning it into, from a cost center to a profit center. And I guess that was my first company, being able to solve a problem.
This feels like tech lessons that you brought to catering? I was hoping for the other way around.
Well, we had a focus on feeding everyone. So vegan, vegetarian, Rastafarian, no pork, we had to make certain that everybody ate.
This is kind of good because it's the opposite of startup focus. You're like, everyone is our customer, not just the one narrow thing.
So what I noticed at catering is that at breakfast, everybody could eat breakfast. Not, it's like, there's, some eggs there and some other stuff, but we also had, some tofu scramble, those sorts of things. It wasn't until lunch and dinner that you really start breaking down like, okay, this is vegan, this is vegetarian, this is chicken. And it's like, okay, based on, your dietary restrictions, you can eat. And so I think one of the things that really has always stuck with me is one, Shelley Lynn and Mike from Talk Catering were just really hyper-focused on the customer. Who was eating? What did they want? And then two, figuring out an easy way to deliver that without breaking the bank and killing your staff. So it's possible. And what you have to do is you have to focus down on your offering. I believe strongly that scarcity brings clarity, that if you raise a lot of capital, you're going to make some decisions that are not optimal. And because it's kind of like that, you get a new bottle of shampoo, first part of it, like, I'm using a lot of shampoo. And as it starts to go down, you're like, okay. It's like anything. When you have limited resources, you have a tendency to make decisions that are more optimized than not.
So I'm going to bring back a question we had long ago. You'll probably remember, Whitney, so in your ideal kitchen cabinet, do you have only one type of Tupperware, like one brand, one type that you have? Or are you just like, I need the right Tupperware for the job? Like you can tell us what you actually have now, but like if you were setting it up, which route would you go?
And this is a question for me.
Yes.
Okay. So we have one. We use standard deli containers, 32, 16, 8 ounce.
Deli person. Yeah. Okay.
And we save all of the other containers for the garage, for keeping track of hardware and those sorts of things. So like empty pasta, tomato sauce cans, like the glass ones.
So let me try to understand how this works out. So use like deli containers, which stuff you would get with takeout, and there might be a variety of manufacturers that do it, but because I don't know if it's an actual like ISO standard, but there's some kind of de facto industry standard that all these things are more or less compatible, right? Like they'll stack with each other, they kind of look the same. Or not. So do you buy like the same things so they're compatible?
Yes.
Or is it just like so like you just go to Costco and buy the thing or wherever you get it from?
Yeah.
Okay. So you've optimized single vendor for your Tupperware.
Right. And but the cool thing about
single standard.
Right. And the cool thing about these is they get stained, they wear out, you put them in the recycling bin. Okay. Yeah. That's great. So you're able to choose another vendor. At some point, you're going to get rid of these. So they get stained with food and you start to go. And in fact, I yesterday had to go and get some more 32 ounce, 1 liter size for our international, non-US.
You've introduced an interesting theory is you have you can introduce natural migration points. Like as you're getting rid of them, you could say like, all right, we've got 5 more of these shitty ones left. Mm-hmm. We'll get rid of them, and then we're going to get the new type, right? Whenever we buy something new, we're not going to buy the legacy containers. And so,
right, we're going to either change to get a thicker plastic or whatever, or another vendor that lasts longer.
Okay,
something cheaper. Yeah. Maybe you're optimizing for cost.
I've never considered the deli thing. That's interesting. That famous cook Kinji, he uses deli containers, maybe because he has a chef background. But I don't know. I feel like there might be something to this deli container thing.
The only problem I have is that they're round. And although that's an optimal shape for packing the most amount of stuff, they leave a lot of space when you're stacking them next to each other.
Right. And what if you have something square like that? Like if you want, and then you wanted to serve something square, that's going to be hard to preserve the squareness, like lasagna.
We put the lasagna in the deli container. You've got the 16 ounce size, pint size, half liter, is going to be perfect size for one single serving of lasagna.
Even though it's round, right? So you don't use the whole space, but that's fine.
Well, right, yeah, but you put it in there, and so we make lasagna, we'll make enchiladas, something like that, and we'll make certain that they fit in that container, and so each one is single serve,
right,
for heating up.
Okay.
I'm going to ask one more question. You've been talking a lot about startups and how to do them well and find the pain and all the advice you've given. Not that anyone would want to do this, but what action would you take to fail a startup? What should you do?
The things that I have seen, I'll talk about where we did fail, and we really screwed up. And where we self-corrected and got it fixed. So at the early days of Liquibase, it was 8 databases we supported. And at the same time, there was an explosion of different databases. And we were having to handcraft bespoke artisanal extensions for each database. And so we did the math. Okay, it takes one engineer 6 weeks to build an extension. We have to build 50 extensions. We're going to be here a while. And so we decided that we were going to make a commitment to change. And we needed to change 2 things. Now, if we had continued down this path, it would have been really bad and we would have been stuck, and that would have caused the company to fail. But we actually invested in 2 things. One, changing the API to make it easier to write extensions. And then 2, building what we call the test harness to make it easy to validate a new extension. And so we really focused on reaching out of the company to the database vendors and hyperscalers to be able to say, look, we've got a customer of yours that wants us to support this. If we support this, they'll use more of your database. Let's partner and get some help from you. And so if we had focused and just gone down the route of old business, manually starting this stuff, instead we made it push button effectively, clone a repo. And there was ways that we could make this easier, but it took time and energy away from adding new features to the product. But we said, no, we are adding features to the product. We're going to make this easier for other people to add extensions, and our partners are going to be doing this. If we had not done that, it would have been really bad. And I don't think we did it soon enough. And I think it cost us a lot of things in the early days. And that's my fault. I was prioritizing features to get larger deals and not expanding the reach
of the deals you already do have.
Yeah, exactly. That was very much short-sighted on my part, and I learned a lot from that.
And startups, what's something that seems like a good idea but is not actually a good idea?
Chasing buzz. We're in Austin. There's this wave of, do we go to South by or not? Do we send our company there? I don't think it's worthwhile to, this new technology is super hot right now. We need to make sure that we litter it all over our website. I think there's something more impactful, which is to show how, for example, AI, right? There is, you don't have to totally pivot the company to be an AI company, but you certainly can show how you're helping companies, your customers that are adopting AI into their business processes, and how you can help. So if you rapidly chase and pivot the company, employees get nervous, they get confused, your customers get nervous and confused. And I think it's really about reaching out to those customers, employees, partners, and really understanding, okay, when we say AI in this context, what do we mean? And so avoiding chasing buzz. You can't have just your marketing, Marcom team do this. It needs to have buy-in from, customer success is bringing in the voice of the customer.
When I think of startups chasing buzz, I think of them doing it more for the sake of VCs than for customers. Is that an accurate?
It depends on their life cycle, but luckily I'm seeing more and more startups that are chasing customers and revenue to get venture capital, and I like that. It is that's for me, that's actionable, it's tangible. I can help them with that, but it's like, well, what does this venture capitalist need? I don't know, but I'm pretty sure it's going to be revenue based. I don't. Other things will tip them over, but at the end of the day, if you're growing and you're doubling revenue, from super tiny amount, month over month, quarter over quarter, whatever your metric is, whatever your period is, great. Do that. Keep doing that, and show increasing revenue at an increasing rate. That's far better than buzz.
Well, all we have on this episode and this podcast is buzz, no revenue. But that means our growth rates.
Do we have either?
The first $500 that we get is going to be infinite growth that we'll have achieved, which would be great. So we can track that. But so thanks for being on. That was fun. Now, if people wanted to track down some more thoughts on Tupperware, growth rates, Liquibase,
flocking Molly,
and catering, do you have some home on the World Wide Web or some social network you would send them to?
Sure thing. RobertReeves.org is a good way to find me, and that just drives you to LinkedIn. That's a fine place to find me. R number 2 at robertreeves.org. Just email me.
Keep the conversation going, as they like to say.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I'd love to hear from people, and I'd love to get some feedback on my thoughts on revenue and certainly how open source supports that. Because I don't have all the answers. I think we all together have all the answers. And I absolutely would love to get feedback from folks and tell me where I was wrong. Put me on blast on LinkedIn. Let me know.
LinkedIn stick
feedback
fights in the
gift.
Future. We'll have to find some little animated GIFs of people fighting about open source business models. I don't know. We'll go to the AI and see what that would look like. Well, as always, speaking of things you can go to the AI to get a picture of, this has been another episode of Software Defined Interviews. Type that in and see what comes up. Thanks for listening to it. If you don't subscribe to it already, you can go to softwaredefinedinterviews.com or search in your podcast listener. It's kind of weird you would be listening this long without already subscribing, but I guess it has to start somewhere, right? Someone has to listen to it without having subscribed and then go and subscribe. So you can do it there. There's also a Slack channel you can join for the broader Software Defined podcast area, and you can talk about tech stuff and other things there. I think there's a food channel. We'll have to run this. I'll ask them what they do with their Tupperware stuff. But with that, thanks for listening. We'll see everyone next time. Bye-bye.
Goodbye.